Bernie Sanders is going to get through this primary. And after Bernie Sanders wins the Democratic nomination for this primary, Bernie Sanders is going to also trounce Donald Trump. There are going to be a large number of independents that are going to vote for Sanders. That 50% of the public that doesn't vote, that 5%, is going to be a landslide. There will be a mandate. There will be an overriding reason, however, that Trump loses. It has to do with the matchup and somewhat of a prevailing narrative that's completely true. That Donald Trump completely and entirely failed. You can say they accomplished the task that he told the American public that he was going to accomplish. Let's talk about it. Coming up. Welcome to the Soapbox. I somewhat botched that opening because this video is about a tweet that Richard Wolff gave. Richard Wolff sent out a tweet, and first and foremost, my name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Thank you for coming. Richard Wolff puts out a tweet. Silent, awesome, and true. And attached to that tweet was information that is going to be a problem for Donald Trump running in the next election, depending on who he's running against. Richard Wolff put out this. Money wages always rise. What matters is real wages, which have been stagnant for decades. Now, he put out a tweet similar to this, and associated with that tweet was this. Real wages. 2019, real wages. And what do you know? Real hourly wages for employees have fell. They fell. Under Donald Trump, real wages fell. Now, when we're having these conversations and Donald Trump is screaming about how awesome the economy is, what he's missing in that, it's like, oh, look at the stock market. Well, the stock market is like 1,000 points less than what it was last year. And then, it's like, look at the employment rate. If there was any president with this employment rate, they'd be loving him to death. Here's the catch. The unemployment rate in this country is somewhat fudged, meaning there are a lot of people who just stop looking for work. And because those people stop looking for work, they are no longer counted in a sense of the labor force. So they could be ignored. They could be skipped over. They're not regarded as employed. Under any normal stretch of the imagination, these people are literally unemployed. If a job was available for them, they would take that job, but they're unemployed. But it's not considered unemployment. So you get somewhat of an artificially low number. Now, even going beyond that artificially low number, even if that number wasn't artificial, the issue is not always whether the person can get a job. It is whether or not that job can supply what they need. Meaning, what's the value of a job if the job doesn't pay your living expenses? It's one thing to be able to get a job that gives you a certain sense of identity while simultaneously ensuring that you can cover your expenses, basic expenses of your life. If a job doesn't do that and an individual has to get multiple jobs, that utterly destroys that individual's ability to live. Is it really a life? Is it really freedom when your life is entirely chained to working multiple jobs because you can't necessarily get the living out of one? That's not an act of God, that's an act of policy. It's an act of policy. Part of the reason that Donald Trump was elected was because of that. This notion that he was going to bring back jobs, he was going to bring back their wages, he was going to increase the minimum wage. He did none of that. In fact, to some degree, the opposite. Because, again, real wages fell. Real wages fell. We really need to change the relationship that we have in this country with the capitalist class. I say that to say this. Any capitalist, any billionaire, millionaire, taking out for the moment money that's inherited, they make that cash based on the labor that people provide them. Now, if you want to argue to me that, hey, I started this company, there should be an excess that I get above what my employees, I am flexible to that particular position. The question becomes how much. And at a certain point, when you're expropriating wealth, when their wages aren't going anywhere and yours are going stratospheric through the roof, then I have to take a second look at this, because at this point it looks like you're exploiting your workers. These are the guys that are building your boats and ships. These are the guys that are cleaning your streets and putting your pieces together for your VCRs or your DVD players or Blu-rays. These are the guys that are fixing your coffee, serving you your food at restaurants, writing your software programs. Like, these are the people that literally build your society, and their wages are flat. And again, while productivity is going through the roof, that productivity is creating profit for a 1% class and a 0.1% that much more. Yes, we need to have a reevaluation in the way that we organize ourselves in the society. The fact that somebody comes up with an idea doesn't necessarily allow them to expropriate wealth in the way that they've been expropriating it from the bottom classes. That excess that you're able to get off of the employees, I can make an argument that you are, to some degree, stealing that money off of them at some point. At which point does that become just exploitive? At what point does it become exploitive? Your workers are finding food banks because they can't pay their wages. I have an uncle. My uncle is working 2 jobs, literally 2 jobs. He's not doing it because he wants to do it. He's doing it because he has to do it. Not to mention he's getting up in the ages, but like most people, he doesn't necessarily have the savings, so he's working 2 jobs, even though he's, becoming an elderly, dashing gentleman. Simultaneously, while he has to work these 2 jobs in order to make ends meet, he has a mom that's ill. How does a man who's working 2 jobs deal with a mom that's ill? He can't afford to stop working one of the jobs. And even when given an opportunity for the Medicare stuff, where Medicare would pay for it, it doesn't pay enough. How does a person deal with that? That is replicated all throughout the United States. He is not alone in that dilemma that he's dealing with. And in fact, just to make this point that much more crystal clear, because my argument here is part of the reason that Donald Trump got elected was because of that level of pain that was propagated throughout the United States. Right here. Food banks. Food banks is a great way of looking at this. How many food banks are there in the United States? And what is the demand and the strain on the food banks? If the world is going great, you would imagine that the demand will go down. If the world is doing horrible or people are in difficult straits, the demand will go up. There are a number of people that don't qualify for assistance, while simultaneously being food insecure. Meaning, certain benefits that the federal government allow for people who are poor are cut off far too early. And because of how strict the guidelines are, there are a whole segment of the population that is entirely food insecure and can't afford to feed themselves. Again, this is not an act of God. This is policy. If you're allowing all of these billionaires to propagate in your society, that is wealth that is in their wallets that can't be used for the benefit of the population. And understand, when they cut public services, those are things that people now have to start paying for. Wages, real wages, are going down for all sorts of reasons. It's not just the amount of money that they get in their paychecks. It's also the things that they have to pay for. Do you have to pay for healthcare out of pocket? Meaning, if I had Medicare for all, that's an expense that I don't have to take on directly. Do I get public transportation for free? If not, that's an expense I need to take on. What about college? If I have to pay back $400 or $500 out of my check each month, as opposed to being able to go to public college for free, that's an expense that is yanked out of my check. These are things that we as a society should turn around and ask, is this the way we want to go with our society? Do we really want millionaires and billionaires taking that much of a chunk out of our coffers? They are only millionaires and billionaires because of you. You buy their products, and not just products, you work at their factories. It is impossible for them to be what they are without the workers allowing them to be that way. There needs to be a reevaluation in the way we organize our affairs. That's my point. This document is amazing. This was essentially a report that was done across the United States. Food insecurity exists in every county in this nation, from high of 36% in Jefferson County, Mississippi, to a low of 4%. Now understand, richest country on the planet. And in one of the counties, 36% of the people in that county, 1 in 3, is insecure. Not knowing where they're going to get their next meal from, not knowing if they can afford their next meal. At state level, the percentage of children estimated to live in food insecure household ranges from 9% in North Dakota to 26% in New Mexico. That's astonishing. And by the way, food insecure, that's not necessarily the government's level, because the governments make their level so stringent. This is people who don't qualify for aid and have to depend on food banks. Counties with the highest rates of food insecurities are geographically concentrated in rural counties. These, outside of major metropolitan areas, make up 63% of all the U.S. counties, but 79% of the counties with food insecurity rates in the top 10%. South Carolina contains 45% of all counties, but 89% of the counties with the highest food insecurity. Here's another one. 11 facts about food banks. In 2013, 62% of food insecure households participated in at least 1 out of 3 major federal food assistance programs. This is a country that is swimming in cash. And yet, this weird disparity of people that can't feed themselves. Why is this okay? Again, this is not an act of God. This is an act of policy. There's a difference in those things. Food bank network members supply food to more than 37 million Americans each year, including 14 million children and 3 million seniors. 300 million people in this country. So what? That's 1 in 5. 34% of households served by Feeding America had to choose between paying for food or medicine. Why is this okay? Why is this okay? And one last point. Right here. I'm going to let Richard Wolff explain this one himself. When we're looking at income disparity, Donald Trump comes in office, says, I'm not going to lower my taxes at all. Lied, outright lied. Passed a massive tax cut that exploded income inequality that was already exploding. Gave himself and his cronies a tax cut. Lied. Said he was going to increase the minimum wage. And by the way, 80-something% of that tax cut went to the top 1%. Just saying. If you want to know a man's priorities, look at what he does. Wanting to get rid of Obamacare. Now, part of this was going to be another tax cut. Because the moment that you get rid of Obamacare, the taxes and everything else, essentially the ones that was funding Obamacare, was going to be taken away. I guess I'm making this point. In one case after the next, there was a strict priority towards the top 1%, despite being in that office when he ran for office saying he was going to work at the behest of the poor and the middle class. This notion and this focus on jobs that Donald Trump had through that election campaign, I would argue, is what won him that election. And yet, that is the thing that he threw overboard immediately upon getting into office. And this falling wages shows it. The falling wages shows it. And it's not just the falling wages. And it's not just the income inequality. It's the income inequality within the context even of the 99%.
Has not stopped.
And by the way, this is in part reason why blacks are leaving the Democratic Party or willing to leave them.
Since the crash of 2008. Inequality, which was partly the cause of that crash, has not been reversed. It has in fact continued and, if anything, accelerated. What this report shows us is that for the mass of working people, inequality has also grown. In other words, it's not just inequality worsening between the 1% and the 99%, But to make it simple, among the 99%, the inequality is also getting worse. Wage growth was consistently higher for higher wage workers compared to those in the middle and at the bottom. Inequality worse among men than among women. Inequality worse among African American as opposed to white workers. The black-white wage gap is larger today than in the year 2000. Listen to this one. The bottom 50% of workers with a college degree still have lower wages than they did in 2000. That's right. Like African American white wage gap, it's worse today. Half of the people with a college degree are worse off today than they were 16 years ago in the United States. The rising inequality of the 1% versus the 99%.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Can you chest stump with us? Can you chest stump with us? When he's going against Sanders, he's going to have to account for that. And saying that the economy is great, again, doesn't quite take into effect what the economy is and which aspects of the economy you're going to fight for and you're going to work for. The reason why I think Sanders matches up better against Trump than anyone else is because, A, there's a tonal, but there's also a texture. The argument that Sanders makes completely obliterates this notion of Donald Trump being this kind of blue-collar billionaire. It's utter nonsense. And of all the people standing there, Sanders is the best bet of making that case. He is the most stark contrast to Trump in the presidential election. You have the most grotesque face of the capitalist system versus the democratic socialists. Donald Trump is going to lose this election because of his failures in office to deal with this notion of income inequality, but also this notion of making people's lives better. He failed at that. And there's going to be a socialist that tells him so. I will end this here. Thanks all.